I first met Susan when I had her son in my second grade class. You know how you know the minute you meet someone that there's this connection, that they're special? That's how it was with Susan. Her son Sean had told me she was retired. And so I thought, wow, a 7-year-old with a retired mother? She must be quite old, quite a bit older. So you can imagine my surprise when a 35-year-old vivacious woman with a smile a mile wide walked through the classroom door. Susan had left her career to be a stay-at-home mom for her only son. Her new career quickly became volunteer. Volunteer she did. She worked with small groups in my classroom at least 3 days a week. And although she only had one child, she helped in all the other classrooms as well. Those of you who are teachers know that this was really a prime person to have around. PTO snatched her up and happily put her to work, and by the end of Sean's second grade year, she was organizing the fundraising gala for the school. As Sean moved through the grades, she still volunteered weekly in my classroom, as well as in his current classroom. She quickly became a very dear friend, not only to me, but to many on our Big Hollow staff. She loved to party, and she hosted wonderful parties, including all people from different parts of her life. When a bunch of teachers were planning a trip to London to visit a colleague of ours, Susan was invited to join us, and she did. About 8 years after we first met, we got the news that Susan had a very rare form of skin cancer. She would be undergoing chemo and radiation. It was devastating, as any of you know who have gone down that road. Throughout her treatments and her hair loss, but she remained vivacious and hopeful and always made everybody else feel comfortable. She kept us updated on her progress through many emails, group emails. I almost forgot to mention her husband, Tom, was a doctor, so he saw to it that she had the best treatment, including specialists at Mayo. However, the news never seemed to be good. Nothing seemed to be arresting this very rare form of cancer. At the end of July in 2009, after more than 2 years of treatments, we received a devastating email from Susan. The doctor said that there was really nothing more they could do. She was given 3 to 5 months to live. In her email, she wondered about how she would use that time to her best advantage. And she said, "One of the things I know I want to do is to spend time with all of you, my dear friends." After reading that email, that late July evening, I was just brokenhearted, feeling helpless. What could I do? I know we've all been in that position. What can you do? And then, on a whim, I copied the recipient list, which included people from all parts of her life, many whom I did not know. And I sent an email to everyone, inviting them to think with me about how we might honor Susan and all that she meant to our lives. Since Susan loved to party, I suggested maybe we'd have a party called Celebrating Susan. By morning, I had more than 50 email responses, and they just kept pouring in. They loved the idea. So we asked Susan's permission to plan an event, and luckily, she was still healthy enough at this point to do it and to enjoy it. And so we invited everyone, and in a matter of 3 weeks, a giant celebration was planned with people volunteering to take a piece of the planning. One offered their spacious home, and another smoked 50 pork roasts for pulled pork, and scouts put up tents, and someone did a memory book, and someone else paid for a videographer, and it was this massive, massive event. celebrate Susan, we did. It gave us each a way to honor her and to work with her. Well, on that day, over 350 friends gathered for this party. And I want you to know there were no invitations sent out. It was word of mouth, it was email, and people came to celebrate Susan. People shared stories on this video about how they had first met Susan and talked about all the special things she had done for them. It was a "this is your life" kind of event. In the months that followed, Susan watched that video over and over. In fact, it played almost in a continuous loop as she laid in her bed. And then she thumbed through that memory book, which was filled with pictures and stories and letters. It was a gift of love. It was all we had to give. In many ways, it was like having the funeral while the person was still alive to hear the good things everyone had to say. Susan died one quiet December morning, surrounded by her close family. Oh, at her funeral, we gave thanks to God for her life and once again celebrated all that she meant to each one of us. By this time, she was only present in spirit. I think we encounter a celebrating Jesus story in our gospel lesson today. This story appears in all the Gospels, but it's only in the Gospel of John that the woman is named, and her name is Mary of Bethany. Jesus is at a dinner party at the home of Mary and Martha. You probably remember Mary and Martha once before when they entertained Jesus. That time, Martha was off preparing the food, and she comes to Jesus and she says, "Hey, Jesus, can you tell my sister to get in here and help me?" Because Mary was just sitting mesmerized at Jesus' feet. And Jesus said, No, Mary has chosen the better part, and which will not be taken from her. Before we go on with the story, I think it's important for you to know what happened in the passages prior to the passage we read today. Mary and Martha had sent word to Jesus because their brother Lazarus was sick and was dying. However, Jesus was delayed in arriving, saying that Lazarus' illness would be used for God's glory. Whatever did that mean? Because of his holdup, Lazarus died before Jesus got there. And when Jesus arrived, everybody was weeping and mourning and standing around Mary and Martha's house, crying and just wailing about this major loss in their lives. The scriptures tell us that Jesus began weeping as well. It's one of those times when we get to see the real humanity of Jesus. And then he asked to be taken to the tomb where they had laid Lazarus. Martha said, hey, you know what? It's no use. He's been in there for 4 days. It's going to stink. I don't think you want to go to that tomb. Yet Jesus said, yes, I do. And let's have that stone rolled away. And then he stood outside and he called Lazarus to come from the tomb. And with grave clothes still wrapped around him, Lazarus walked from the tomb. He was alive. Jesus had raised him from the dead. As word got out about this miraculous event, the chief priests and the Pharisees were even more angered. The plot to kill Jesus was gaining even more momentum. So Jesus no longer walked about openly. He slipped off to a small town called Ephraim near the wilderness, and he remained there with his disciples. I guess he was probably trying to teach them as much as he could before his impending death. Then right there in the midst of all this anxiety, all this plotting and threat, or perhaps in spite of it, Jesus' friends, Mary and Martha and Lazarus, decided, you know what? Let's throw a dinner party. That's right. It was a celebrating Jesus party, much like the one we had for Susan. And who can blame them for wanting to party? For heaven's sakes, Lazarus wasn't just sort of dead or metaphorically dead like the prodigal son. He was dead, dead, dead. Dead long enough to cause a stench. Long enough to bring the whole family in town and his good friends together in grief. And now he was alive. What a lot they had to celebrate. So this was a party to honor and to thank Jesus and to celebrate Lazarus' recovery. The wonderful preacher, Barbara Brown Taylor, says that Jesus must have known. He must have known that he was a marked man. In fact, they had tried to stone him before. He was on the religious right's most wanted list, and he must have known that his days were really numbered. Mary, too, must surely have been able to see the big picture. She must have known where all this was heading with Jesus. So out of gratitude, Mary was moved to give an extravagant gift, a gift of love. Two college students, Frank and Matt, were riding on the New York subway when a beggar came up to them and asked them, "Hey, got any spare change?" Frank adamantly dismissed the guy with disgust. Matt, on the other hand, whipped out his wallet, pulled out a $5 bill, and handed it over to the beggar with a smile. The beggar thanked him kindly and then continued on to beg from other passengers. Frank was outraged. "Hey, man, what are you doing? What on earth did you do that for? He's only going to use it on booze." Matt replied, "Hey, man, so are we." It's always hard to know in those situations what to do, what the best way is to handle it. Matt chose generosity. That may not have been an extravagant gift, but it was a gift given from a generous heart. And then there are those who lavishly give of themselves to others. I've been blessed to know a few of those folks, and I'm sure you have too. People who have that very kind, generous, giving heart, and they give, and they give, and they give without counting the cost. One of those people was Jan Embry. A lot of you will remember her if you've been a part of this congregation for more than 5 years. For those of you who don't know her, her picture hangs on the wall outside our office door. You see, Jan spent a good portion of her time giving of herself to this church. She was a little lady, not even 5 feet tall, and probably not 90 pounds soaking wet. She faithfully arrived here each morning at 6:30 by the bus, because she didn't drive. And just like mail service, nothing could deter her. Rain, snow, sleet, Jan was here. She'd work on Sunday school projects all morning, cutting out little things, getting everything ready, and sometimes stay even into the afternoon. And then anytime there was anything going on around here, and I think of Jan as we're planning this tea now, because she would have been all over that. Jan was the first to volunteer or offer up a donation to a project. She always proudly gave me money for the youth to buy ice cream when we were on our mission trips. Jan loved to make gifts. She loved to give gifts, to find that special thing that you would really like. And then she loved to watch you open the treasure, and seeing your reaction gave her lots of pleasure. She had no family except us. She lived a simple life, and she seemed to have to count her pennies to make ends meet. A little more than 5 years ago, it's hard to believe, On a cold snow February day, Jan passed away. We celebrated her life and thanked God for all the ways she touched our lives. Although we had always considered Jan to be a woman of limited financial resources, we were astounded to discover that she left the church a gift of $94,000. And we were even more astonished that she had enough money to leave that same amount for 3 other organizations she supported. So as she lives on in eternal life, she continues to generously bless us and others with her love. While the party was going on in full swing, Mary slipped away. She slipped away to get her precious gift. I wonder if she had bought that costly perfume to anoint her dead brother Lazarus. Otherwise, why would she have had it? But now it was no longer needed for him. And so she decided to lavishly use it on Jesus. Oh, she could have saved it for another time, or she could have sold it for a lot of money, as Judas suggested also. Some say it was worth a year's wages. As Mary stood before Jesus with that pound of pure nard in her hand, it could have gone either way. She could have anointed his head, which is what they did when they made someone a king, and so that would have proclaimed that Jesus was king. But she did not do that. When she moved toward him, she dropped to her knees instead, and she poured that perfume on his feet, as one would anoint a corpse, and Jesus knew it. She did things that were not acceptable in polite company in that culture and time, but she wasn't concerned about what others thought. It was an act of defiance. It wasn't an act of defiance, but rather one of pure love. She unbound her hair, loosened it as women did only for their husbands or when they were mourning. And she poured that expensive balm on Jesus' feet. She touched Jesus, even though she was a single woman, and that was thought totally inappropriate. Then she wiped his feet with her hair. Mary took the best she had to give, and in an hour of need, as death loomed over this little band of disciples, she gave her all. As Mary down here, Mary of Bethany, so poignantly told us, all she had to give to the one she loved, the one she was about to lose. And she knew it would stay with him. It was a gift that couldn't be taken away. It was a gift that would linger. By wiping Jesus' feet with her hair, Mary ensured that the fragrance would linger on her own body in the days to come. And that memory would cling to her when her friend was taken in the middle of the night, when he was convicted on false charges, when he poured out his life and offered forgiveness on the cross. What about us? Can we be moved to give generously, extravagantly, without counting the cost? Will we let our hearts be broken open to one another and to the world God loves? This woman, even in the face of criticism, held nothing back. Not the most expensive gift she could give, and not the gift of her own breaking heart, full of love. This woman is our teacher today. She helps us recognize who Jesus is and who we are called to be as his faithful disciples. And I wonder, the next day, how did she feel the next day?